Hello, good evening, and I think it's more or less time now to say goodbye to the book of Leviticus, which I hope you'll agree with me is not as dull and off-putting as it first seemed. Now, I just want to do two things. First of all, chapter 23 of the book of Leviticus gives us a catalogue of the Jewish feasts. And even though we're Christians, not Jews, we are familiar with these Jewish feasts. Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Tabernacles, and the Feast of Pentecost, which is sort of a harvest festival, though for us Pentecost is something different. Tabernacles is particularly endearing. Tabernacles is basically you go, it doesn't say it here it gives the timing of tabernacles, it doesn't tell you what to do. You go and construct a booth in your garden or your field and you go and live in it to remind yourself that once upon a time you were part of a wandering, unsettled race who lived in temporary structures. This idea is a very, very common idea. In fact, it's a leitmotif throughout a theme throughout the Old Testament. The idea is that even though we are settled people, we need to remember that once we were nomads, and in our hearts we are still nomadic, because the nomad depends completely on God rather than on his or her individual wealth that comes from the soil. Now, if we go to chapter 25, though, we have certain regulations that are laid down, which are clearly to do with settled people. Now, the first is the sabbatical year. Every 7 years, the land, the agricultural land, is to be given a year off. Every 7 years, you are not supposed to plough your field. You're not supposed to harvest your grain. You're just supposed to forage. You just leave everything lie fallow, and you eat whatever the land provides. So you become a forager. Practical? Probably not. Practical possibly only if you've got a very tiny population. Yet there is some evidence in the book of Maccabees, and let me tell you where, if you want to look that up. Maccabees, number 1, the first book of Maccabees, chapter 6, verses 48 to 54. There is some evidence that this was the case. So in that Maccabees passage, the Jewish rebels are under siege and they're running out of food because it's a sabbatical year. In other words, they don't have a massive harvest to keep them going. So what you do during the sabbatical year, I'm not sure. Maybe you make sure you save on your harvest from previous years and you live off that and you give the land a year off. It's not the same as letting fields lie fallow to recover. Or it's more that the land, like the human being, needs a year off. It's totally impractical, I have to say. And it's only mentioned, I think, in Nehemiah and in Maccabees. So it doesn't seem to be a feature of Jewish life. There's no mention of it, for example, in the New Testament. And it doesn't happen today in modern Israel, does it? And I don't think it happened in places where the children of Israel have lived elsewhere, such as in Russia or in parts of America today. I don't think it happens. I don't think Jewish farmers give their land a year off every 7 years. Okay, so, but it's trying to tell us something, isn't it? That just as we need a day off, so the land needs a year off every 7 years. Then something else happens, the year of Jubilee. Every 7 times 7, there is going to be a special year, a year of Jubilee. When you blow your trumpet, Jubilee is the sound that a trumpet makes when it blows. So every 50th, 49th, after 49 years, the 50th year is a year, a Sabbath of Sabbaths, if you like. And this is a year for cancellation of debts, for everybody to go back to where they come from. And if you like, a general resetting of society, a great reset, if you want. In other words, slaves will be set free if they've sold themselves into slavery. Debts will be cancelled, and people will go back to their ancestral property and take possession of it. Now, I don't think that this Jubilee was ever observed in ancient Israel. It's an aspiration. It was never carried out, largely again because it's so impractical. Now, however, the concept of the Jubilee is something that has entered the Catholic consciousness. And every 50 years, there used to be a holy year. Now, I say this used to be because then they changed the holy year to every 25 years. And now they've had occasional holy years in between. So you can sometimes get them every 12 and a half years. The idea of the holy year and indeed the idea of the Jubilee, if it's once every 50 years, everybody would experience it as a once of a lifetime experience. Nobody would say, oh, I remember the last Jubilee, it's not as good as this one, or was that effect. No, it'd be once every 50 years, once in a lifetime, where we, if you like, make up our accounts with the Lord and reset everything, cancel all debts, go back to the beginning and start again. Now, the Holy Year, and the first Holy Year I think was in 1300 or something like that. Dante, I think, was present at the first Holy Year. The first Holy Year was an attempt to do just that, was to attract people to come on Rome to pilgrimage, and to get a plenary indulgence, to go through the Holy Door and to cancel out their sins, so then they could go back home and start again. I suppose we start again with God every time we tell him we're sorry for our sins. But, and that's only right, but every now and then we need to have a major start again. And that is, if you read chapter 25 of the book of Leviticus, what is happening for the people of Israel. Everything will be redeemed, everything will go back. And all the debts will be cancelled and so on. In the year 2000, St. John Paul II tried to revive this great tradition, this biblical tradition, by talking about the cancellation of debt. And the idea was that the indebted nations of the world would have their debts cancelled. We do believe in the cancellation of debt still, and the forgiveness of debt. You might remember some years ago, Greece got into terrible debt, and it was called, not very glamorously, the haircut. That is to say, that they would reduce the Greek debt by a considerable amount. And this is, of course, comes from the idea of Jubilee. But the idea of all debts being cancelled every 50 years would mean, of course, a complete restructuring of the banking system every 50 years. Now, I know as soon as you say it like that, you think, oh, that's impossible, isn't it? How can we do that? We can't. And yet, maybe it wouldn't be such a bad thing if all debts were cancelled every 50 years. Okay, that means, of course, it would mean, as it's laid down here in Leviticus, but as we say, there's no evidence it's ever done, that debts would only be incurred for 50 years. Then after 50 years, boom, end of debt. Okay, all the best. So it's goodbye, I think, to the wonderful book of Leviticus, and it'll soon be hello to the book of Numbers. All the best if you've been following us so far. Bye.